Hello and welcome to the Virginia Solar Summit live stream. I'm your host, Dan French. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. The Virginia Solar Summit live stream is recorded before a live participatory audience. Thanks to those of us for joining today. Plug into the Renaissance, connect with pros, and participate in the next episode live on our website, or at our website, virginiasolarsummit.com/livestream. The Virginia Solar Summit is a diverse community of solar energy, real estate, environment, and economic development professionals. And we are produced in collaboration with the diversity of organizations united by a common goal to catalyze a solar power renaissance in Greater Virginia that re-energizes our economies, revitalizes our communities, and restores our environment. The collaborative organizations behind the Virginia Solar Summit again in 2022 include Appalachian Voices, the Virginia Department of Energy, the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality, and the Western Virginia Brownfields Assistance Center at West Virginia University. We are substantively focused on the development of solar energy, tactically focused on land use and redevelopment, geographically concerned with Virginia and West Virginia, and regionally oriented towards similar solar developments across all of Appalachia. We organize a market-making, groundbreaking, and always entertaining event, the Virginia Solar Summit, and we look forward to seeing you in person at the next one in Richmond, April 26th, 27th, and 28th. Plug into the Renaissance and learn more on our website, virginiasolarsummit.com. On today's episode, our special guest, Mr. Harrison Godfrey, recently named Managing Director at Advanced Energy Economy. Congratulations, Harry. We are brought to you by Dominion Energy, leveraging innovation for a clean energy future. Hashtag actions speak louder. Learn more at dominionenergy.com. As well as Mission Disposal, the essential site services company specializing in day-to-day supply and sanitation needs during solar and commercial construction. Learn more at missiondisposal.com. And you can check out all of our awesome sponsors there. Shout out Sun Tribe today. Shout out BQ Energy. Shout out Monarch Vegetation Services. Everyone out there doing this super important work to save the planet, revitalize our economies. Thank you so much. And a special announcement before we get to our featured guest, just a few things, as you know, if you've watched the show before. But first, again, we are coming back to Richmond. So if you had any trouble registering, make sure if you didn't get a confirmation number, some folks, depending on how you registered from a mobile device or what browser, you may have thought you registered, you did not. So make sure you got a confirmation number and an email from us. We extended the early bird tickets and made more available. We actually sold out anyway, despite the difficulties, but as you may have noticed already, the extra early bird rates are still available, and they will remain available until tomorrow night, Friday, January 21st. So we hope you can snatch that savings. The early bird gets the worm, and we'll see you in Richmond in the spring. Okay, a few things. Our friends at DOE are hiring. And they have this event next week, Monday, January 24th at 1 p.m. Eastern. Check it out, energy.gov/live. You can watch it live. Go to energy.gov. They've got a lot of new bodies that they're seeking. They're trying to hire a lot of people. So we encourage you to check that out. There's also next week, hope your coffee is strong. There's a lot of great events. So January 24th at 1 p.m. Eastern is this awesome redevelopment webinar. State programs. We've got a friend of the summit, Laura Strine, there from US EPA, and I highly encourage this one, a free event for everybody. You can see the website there, cluin.org for more on that. Also next week, Tuesday, you can see some of the stars from Sun Tribe Solar Development. Betsy Arlen and Austin DeButz will be joining us same time, 2 p.m. Eastern on Tuesday, January 25th. We're going to do a deep dive into the huge cornucopia of benefits that come from solar construction, both direct to project stakeholders like the landowners, but also the neighbors and the area at large. So stay tuned for that substantive event. And then also, again, from our friends at U.S. Department of Energy, the Office of Economic Impact and Diversity is this on January 26th, 2:30 p.m. Eastern, reducing barriers to DOE opportunities, targeting our workforce challenges and giving folks a leg into the vibrantly growing energy space. And make sure you check this out. You can see the website there for those listening. It's on Eventbrite. You can search for Reducing Barriers to DOE Opportunities, January 6th at 2:30 p.m. Eastern. And again, next week, it's just a jam-packed week, so brace yourselves. The Renaissance is coming fast and furious. January 27th, Thursday, again at 2 p.m. Eastern time. We'll have another special guest, David Peterson, Executive Director of Shine. We're putting these workforce issues in clear focus next week, not just us, but everyone, because clearly everyone I talk to, this is kind of the bottleneck cross sectors, cross industry. So stay tuned for that. And on a related note, but somewhat different beat, our friends at the Appalachian Regional Commission have this Inspire initiative that's about substance abuse, a topic near and dear to my heart. Again, it's systemic. It's hurting our workforce. They've had this a great program out there, substantial multi-million-dollar program, helping communities battle substance abuse at the local level. And they put out this RFP due February 17th for an evaluation of that program. And I know we have a lot of smart people in our audience, and this isn't exactly our space, but you may have a friend of a friend. We're really looking for some big brains to go after this substance abuse program, which is hurting our space and hurting the call to the workforce, as I said, in all spaces. All right, having whipped through that, I hope everyone is ready for a very special guest. We're happy to steal his time today. He's a busy guy. And I hope he didn't mind that kind of whip around some other events and whatnot. Let me introduce our guest today, Mr. Harrison Godfrey. Harry, recently promoted managing director. He was formerly leading Virginia Advanced Energy Economy, and he was co-leading AEE's Advanced Energy Manufacturing Infrastructure Working Group. He's got experience, deep experience in the industry, federal government, academia, and Harry conducts advocacy efforts these days with legislators, regulators, the Virginia Governor's Office, as many folks know. If you're tracking him at all, or if you're in this space, you see Harry pop up. He's been playing a pivotal role in the passage of the the Virginia Clean Economy Act, of course. Before arriving at AEE about 4 years ago, I believe, Harry worked at Invenergy and Opower, where he developed experience in renewable generation and energy efficiency. He previously held positions in the White House Office of Legislative Affairs and the Office of Majority Whip James E. Clyburn. As a younger person, and I'll ask him about this in a second, but he got his Bachelor of Arts at the College of William and Mary and a Master's of Public Administration at Princeton University. We'll have another Princeton alum on the show next week, Carrie, but welcome to the show. And I want to begin kind of at the beginning. What you got an inkling in college to go down this kind of Renaissance road? How did you end up doing energy policy and doing it so well? Maybe others are thinking about following in your footsteps. How did they do what you have done?
Dan, thanks so much for having me. Really excited to be here today and talk about all of these topics. How did I get started in this? Well, I like politics and economics and high school and college. I studied those sort of things in college, and I really went from there into sort of broad political work, first in Congress and then in the first couple of years of the Obama administration. And obviously, in the first couple of years of the Obama administration, there was a significant push to move a variety of big pieces of legislation through Congress. Obviously, the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, as everybody knows, Dodd-Frank financial reform, obviously coming out of the 2008, 2009 financial crisis, that was incredibly important. And then the third piece, Waxman-Markey, better known as sort of the cap and trade bill, the first really significant attempt to sort of take a national policy look at how do we tackle issues of the energy transition, of decarbonizing our grid and moving us in that direction. That was a fascinating look for me. And of those policy areas, I really thought that the energy policy was the most fascinating because at the time it was also the most bipartisan effort there, and it created unique and interesting coalitions. And so from a political perspective, I found that fascinating. From a ethical or moral perspective, I found it sort of an urgent need to tackle some of these sort of critical issues. And then from an industry perspective, and here is this incredibly rapidly evolving and dynamic sector of our economy that really was worth a further look. So went back to school to get more depth around energy policy, then came out and worked at a couple of different companies doing very different things. Opower, behavioral energy efficiency, really thinking about what can individuals do to help reduce their energy footprint, learning a lot about efficiency on the ground. And then Invenergy, really working in diversified energy development. Spent a lot of time up and down the Eastern Seaboard on wind projects and solar projects and energy storage. So learning the sort of practical on the ground activities and some of how the public interacts with that at a very grassroots level. And then finally came over to AEE. It's been just over 4 years now. Well, I guess it's been just about 4 years now that I've been at AEE, chiefly focused on our Virginia work, and then more recently expanding out to talk about manufacturing and some national policy work. I hope we'll find some time a little bit later in the show to talk a little bit more about that. But yeah, that's my journey.
Yeah, super helpful. And I like how you kind of saw the water, where the waters were stirring and dove in. That's certainly at a very, very key juncture, I think, in human history, and where policy has made such a big difference. So can you maybe dive right into that? I've seen a huge pivot over the last decade plus. It's, every year it's kind of cascading more and more. But you can focus on your last 4 years of your journey since you began at AAE, or however you wish. But can you speak to the trends in energy that you've seen and the pace of change?
Yeah, I mean, and I think there are plenty of people on I'm sure watching this episode, will be listening to it later, who know this even better than I, or experiencing it firsthand. There is this extraordinary acceleration in terms of the pace of change of this technology. It is not moving in a linear format. Obviously, the price trajectories we're seeing around solar, and we're seeing increasingly around battery storage, sort of bear out that accelerating pace of change, because fundamentally it's about the economics of these commodities, and the economics of these commodities are rapidly changing. Combine that with a shifting policy environment, and you have this just dramatic transformation. We've seen this in the electric generation sector for a little while, and we are increasingly seeing this in the transportation sector. I think that will be an even more head-snapping change over time. But my work for the last 4 years has really drilled in on the great Commonwealth of Virginia. And here too, I think it's a microcosm of how rapidly this shift is occurring. When I started in this role in 2018, I came into a state where there was some initial appetite for development. There wasn't, there was discussion around the possibility for offshore wind, an initial sort of attempts at doing some solar work, but it was still very early days. And there certainly wasn't any onshore wind either. Over that time, starting with the Grid Transformation Act in 2018, and then obviously the Clean Economy Act in 2020, and the state joining the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative at the same time, and then Clean Cars in 2021. You look at where Virginia is today as opposed to 4 years ago, and it's night and day. And we're seeing the reality of that policy shift play out on the ground as well. When I came in, one of the first bills that we tried to move was a bill. Virginia had a solar PPA pilot program for, we'll say, sort of essentially mid-size solar projects, chiefly at schools, small businesses, nonprofits, that had a cap of 50 megawatts. Folks were starting to use that. And as folks looked at the pipeline of projects coming in it, a lot of solar developers came to us and said, we're going to hit that cap pretty fast. And so we went to the legislature and we said, hey, it would be good if we could take this cap from 50 megawatts to say, can we say like 200, 250, 5x, because that gives us some additional runway. And the answer was no. 4 years later, not only did we raise that cap, the VCA took that cap from 50 megawatts to 1,000 megawatts in Dominion service territory. And we see those sort of projects, just a bunch of which are done by some of the sponsors of this program today, exploding across it. In 2020, I want to say, Virginia outpaced 44 of 50 states in terms of total sort of solar development happening in the state that year. I mean, we're just seeing an extraordinary acceleration of this industry in the state, and it's really exciting to see.
Yeah, we had some conservatives on our last episode of the Virginia Solar Summit live stream, and we spent a considerable time talking about the change in economics from the days of tearing solar panels off the roof of the White House in the early 80s to today, but particularly the last 10 years, where again the economics have really moved. Now these projects are starting to pencil, and the message it's really starting to permeate out there. But can we pivot maybe? Thanks again for just joining the show today and making yourself available to the audience. I really wanted you to do three things for us: kind of look into the past, read the tea leaves of the moment, and then see the future. So a small ask, but could we start with our history, maybe at the most recent history, captured national headlines, which of course is the Commonwealth's big election and the somewhat surprising, even now still, election maybe of Governor Youngkin.
Yeah, sure. And obviously, having been engaged in the policy space, we likewise have paid a lot of attention to the political space in Virginia. I think the important thing as folks from outside Virginia look at the results of the most recent election is not to overinterpret those results. I think there were a set of folks who immediately following the Youngkin election went, oh my God, like we thought it was a blue state and now it's a red state, like has Virginia reverted to that? I think that's too strong an interpretation. And there are a couple reasons. First, I really look at the Youngkin election and I see a variety of driving factors in that, really none of them having to do anything with energy. I see COVID and dissatisfaction around school closures. I see the issues or, the debate around critical race theory, particularly in some very specific localities in Virginia playing a role there. I see some of the national dynamics, the conversation around inflation and the approval ratings of the White House pulling down the Democratic nominee. And then I think a lot of folks say, well, Biden won Virginia by 10. Youngkin just won the state by 2. Isn't that a 12-point swing? It's worth noting that in the 2020 election, the Trump campaign didn't really contest Virginia. I think, a Republican candidate that did probably would have closed that margin to, 4, 5, maybe 6 points. So we're talking about a swing of, of somewhere in the range of 4 to 6 points, which is significant, but it's not a sea change. And I think that's important to note. And the other place where we really see that play out is in the Democratic House. The Senate did not have elections, so the Senate remains in Democratic control, but the House moved from being Democratic to Republican. If folks look back 2 cycles, before the 2017 elections, Democrats held about 35 seats out of 100 in the Virginia General Assembly. Over the course of those 2 elections, they picked up, before this most recent one, they picked up 20 seats. If this was a full seat change and a reversion to norm, I think we should expect that Democrats would lose the vast majority of those 15, 17 seats. Democrats lost seats in the House in this last election. They lost 7 seats. That is not a wholesale swing. I think it is a shift and a return to a solidly purple state. But to interpret this as somehow being like suddenly Virginia's a red state, it's closed for clean energy businesses, I think that would be an overinterpretation. So that's how we look at that, the sort of immediate history of that. And that's what, of course, sets the stage for where we are now entering the legislative session.
Thanks, Harry. That's super helpful context because we do have to be very specific and zero in on these things. Our national analogies are just that, and these things are moving on different tiers. That's the beauty of the American system, if you will. So can we maybe turn tactically now? I think it's what our audience cares most about. How do you assess the Youngkin administration coming in from a pragmatic perspective, from a realistic perspective? I mean, even the Virginia Clean Economy Act, was heavily negotiated. It was bipartisan. I'm always hopeful for the big deal. But how do you see, obviously we're kicking off right now, but going forward in the Youngkin administration, how do you see it?
Yeah, we congratulated Governor Youngkin upon his victory when that was finalized early on Wednesday morning following the election, and we approached it with sort of notes of cautious optimism. But as we discussed in the answer to the last question, the issues on the campaign trail were education, economics, kitchen table cost issues, sort of stuff like that. Some of that stuff sort of could loosely be connected to energy policy, but energy policy really wasn't a central issue there. So in a lot of ways, when pressed during debates, Youngkin had things that were not necessarily encouraging to say about the Clean Economy Act. although he would also pivot to talk about how he wanted to encourage wind and solar development in the state. So that's encouraging as well. So when the now governor was elected, we congratulated him, and we've extended a hand saying that we would like to work with him on the issues that he cares about. Economic growth. I mean, this is a sector based upon our own analysis that employs over 93,000 people in the Commonwealth. So a really significant sector. That's 4 or 5 times the size of the telecommunications sector in Virginia. We're big business in the state, and a sector that's growing faster than the state's economy as a whole. So if what you care about is job growth, new business creation, investment in Virginia, then you should be pro advanced energy and transportation in the state. So we extended a hand to the governor's office around that. And obviously, the governor has experience in the private sector. While he was at the Carlyle Group, he directed a number of different investments that included clean energy investments. He and other leadership at Carlyle moved the company as a whole towards being net zero. And so there seemed to be some sort of early indications that we might have someone here that the community is able to work with. I'm sure, as we'll dive into a little bit more, there have been some more recent indications that have tempered that optimism.
And recent developments, attempts, the regional greenhouse gas initiative, for example, that might be a little bit more tricky. It was multiple pieces of legislation that became law that makes that kind of legal wrangling. But looking to kind of our ritualized, combat, Democrats versus Republicans, kind of posting up on each side. I mean, it happened kind of at the national scale, maybe during the Trump administration. And there's that fear that you mentioned. Are the Republicans just going on offense? Are they going to try to take a hatchet to everything that the previous administration had done? And then I think you've seen a lot of press. The watchword for the Democrats is defense. So can you maybe get into X's and O's a little bit with us? How does the offense defense play out? And are there opportunities? Are there circles that the mutual sides will draw to get some bills actually passed? Or is it just math, Harry? Is it just math? And it's the algorithm says 21-9 in the Senate, and it's gridlock.
It's a great question, Dan. And if I could tell you how it's going to play out by mid-March, I think I would be getting paid a lot of money. I can't. And there are a lot of different moving factors, but it's worth sort of going through the various dynamics at play to get a sense of how things might shake out and what the various things are. I think to build on sort of the last conversation we were just having, before he was inaugurated, the governor did a couple of things around energy and environmental policy, which have not left the broader community particularly optimistic about his leadership, and may have also, for lack of a better term, poisoned the well, or at least soured the desire for some bipartisan collaboration. The first one was the governor's announcement in December that he intended to withdraw Virginia from the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. I think, as folks have seen in coverage, and I am not a lawyer, but sort of the legal assessment of that is that he does not, in fact, have the power to unilaterally do that, because there was both a thorough regulatory process as well as legislative authorization and direction that ultimately moved Virginia into that regulatory compact. And all the legal minds I have heard opine on this say you would need legislative action to withdraw Virginia from RGGI. But the larger signal that announcement sent wasn't a positive one. It particularly wasn't a positive one for the environmental community, which AE does not represent. But it also wasn't a positive one to the clean energy community, because half of the RGGI dollars that come into Virginia flow into energy efficiency projects in low and moderate income communities. I mean, that is a significant opportunity, both to help people lower their costs, but also for the efficiency community to build its business and move those sort of projects and services out to a wider variety of markets. So that was probably not a great foot to start on. And then from there, in early January, the incoming governor's administration announced that they intended to nominate Andrew Wheeler, former EPA administrator, to be their Secretary of Natural and Historic Resources. The environmental community raised some very serious concerns about that, given their read of his tenure at EPA. I think for the clean energy community, the reason why we have to look very carefully at Wheeler's track record and make, very deliberate judgments about that is because were he confirmed as Secretary of Natural Resources, he would oversee the Department of Environmental Quality. DEQ has a couple of important roles to play in the development of a clean energy and transportation future. DEQ is the agency that oversees the permit by rule process by which a lot of small and medium scale wind, solar, and energy storage projects are permitted. It is a streamlined permitting process intended for that. So there's obviously influence and impact there. DEQ has also been the clearinghouse for a lot of the transportation electrification work that has been done in the state, chiefly utilizing VW settlement dollars. I know that's a little outside of this summit, but it's sort of important to note. Here's why the industry has to be very attentive to that nomination. So, that frames the conversation. And then, you do have a Senate which has, particularly for the past 2 years, passed a set of landmark pieces of legislation, the Clean Economy Act, RGGI, Clean Cars. It's the same folks who just voted for that. So I don't think there is an appetite, and from my conversations with lawmakers in that chamber, I don't think there's an appetite to see a lot of the things that they worked hard for and took some tough votes on rolled back. But we will see, I think, some legislation, happy to talk about some of those particulars around that. So I think, in the Republican House, we'll see stuff that sort of tries to advance the governor's agenda, goes after these elements, and then in the Democratic Senate, I think we'll see a lot of resistance to that. Is there the possibility for some bipartisan compromise in there? Time will tell. I think right now, there's a real concern that if anything that opens up code sections around the Clean Economy Act, around RGGI, around Clean Cars, makes it to the governor's desk, the governor can, even if it is innocuous, it is then germane for the governor to open that up and modify that and send it back to the legislature. And that is obviously a significant risk to those equities. So that's why I think the clean energy, as well as the environmental community, are being very cautious. And obviously, Democrats in the House and Senate are being very defensive about those policies.
Thanks, Harry. Terrific stuff. Bottom of the hour, Virginia Solar Summit live stream. We're brought to you by Dominion Energy and Mission Disposal. You can start dropping your questions in the chat. We will have a hard break at the top of the hour, but we're going to try to get to audience questions so you can start to queue them up. But I'm certainly not done with my friend Harry, because we have a lot to talk about. We could talk about VW settlement all day long. Many spokes to the wheel of the Renaissance, my friend. And I think you're right. I mean, it's amazing. We've been talking about kind of the federal analogy, not being so germane to the Virginia experience, except in the case of Mr. Wheeler, where he's coming from the Trump administration, quite literally a federal player and somewhat of a known quantity. I think, a detailed study of the EPA under Administrator Wheeler might surprise some. We can maybe talk more about that. But back to what you were just saying about some bipartisan potential, I tend to agree. I don't see big deal potential, but like the Biden today, President Biden is talking about breaking up Build Back Better, maybe smaller chunks, and there maybe we can find places where Democrats and Republicans agree. I've caught in the press even just talking about the Clean Economy Act. So this, if I can read something from House Majority Leader Terry Kilgore, who was he joined us at the last virtual Virginia Solar Summit from Southwest Virginia, big believer in solar. But here's what he said, we know that we want to get to a clean economy and use renewable energy, but the sun doesn't shine every day and the wind doesn't blow every day. So you've got to have that backup power plant with natural gas or coal or refuse coal. And then he went on to say, we're going to be making some amendments to the Virginia Clean Economy Act. Are we going to go with a wholesale rollback? I'd say not. but we are going to try to address some issues that could lower folks' power rate. So how do you see that, Harry? Is that reality to you, or are those ships passing in the night?
Those, I fear, are ships passing in the night. I think, it is good to hear the incoming majority leader talk about the opportunity, particularly the opportunity for Southwest, that energy storage, solar, wind development poses. I know that he has been out there, and I believe that he genuinely believes that. There are some things that are omitted from that statement that I think it's worth noting. The first and foremost one is that the Clean Economy Act preserves the place of nuclear generation as a clean energy resource in the grid. And that, that sort of gets left out of the conversation, and it's a really important omission. Nuclear makes up just about 30% of generation in Virginia, powering our grid today. So you've got this always on baseload generation that's there, which I think really belies the point about, well, if we make this conversion, there's just, we're only going to be relying on wind and solar and nothing else. I'll also note the Clean Economy Act includes one of the most significant energy storage targets in the country, and that's intended to be complementary with the build out of more wind and solar and other renewable resources, so that we do have a resilient, a flexible, and a cost-effective grid. The larger point I'd make, and happy to come back and drill on this one further, is, what the majority leader alludes to in his statement is some early cost analysis around the VCA, which for a variety of reasons we think was very much off the mark. And we actually just completed an updated cost analysis. What is the VCA really going to cost the average Virginia family in 2030? Because it's a little hard to talk about 2045 and those sort of dynamics. Truth be told, the numbers actually get even better the further out you go, but let's talk about it within that 10-year window. And what we have found is when you put together all of the elements of this law, and it's complex, and there are multiple legs in this stool that it relies upon, but when you put all those elements together, efficiency, plant retirements, offshore wind, broad development of renewables, particularly solar development, energy storage, and all of these elements, in 2030, people's bills will be lower, not higher, provided we stay on track with the Clean Economy Act and we actually meet our targets and continue forward along those trajectories. Per year, they'll save about $30. That's a real savings, particularly for low and middle class families who are sort of struggling to make ends meet. But this idea that somehow the Clean Economy Act is written is going to explode people's costs, our analysis just doesn't bear it out. I think that takes a very selective interpretation of, they look at some elements and not all others. This really needs to be looked at altogether. That's the clean energy future that we're building. It's cost effective, it creates jobs, it drives investment, and it leads to a cleaner grid.
Yeah, thanks, Harry. Let me give you a double-digit upward revision to the number that you mentioned, because I have it in front of me, again, from Advanced Energy Economy, and I think it's AEE.net. Correct me if I'm wrong, Harry, but your latest analysis estimates that the average residential customer could save $34 annually. I believe you might have said 30 flat, rounding down. That's okay, my friend, but it's 34. And then for our detailed pros in our audience, and you see a lot of Republican lawmakers pointing to this study that Harry referenced. It's the 2020 estimates by the State Corporation Commission, which I think had a number in the area of $800 cost increase, which again, Harry, you can pick that apart now, but I think it's, it's early analysis. These things are changing quickly. The cost of renewables keeps plummeting, and it didn't even get into like future investments and things like that. And I would just add quickly, like going to some of our biggest forecasts from the IEA, the International Energy Agency. We've been getting it wrong on renewables for 20 years. We've always had to revise the forecast up and the cost curves down. We install more solar, put in more wind than we forecast. Every year they revise it, and we just always get it wrong. And it's been kind of amazing. But here, go ahead, Harry, jump in.
No, I think that's, I'm so glad that you flagged that. We are working to very carefully analyze what they did. It's a little hard to conceive of how on earth they actually reached that number. I think they essentially assumed that like you noted, they assume some cost projections that are sort of wildly out of place, and they totally ignore a set of savings. In our analysis, and we'll be sharing more of that in the days and weeks ahead, we look at this and we know to build this grid, there are costs. But what we also see is on net, as we layer the savings that come with it on top of those costs, the savings outweigh them. And that's how we get to our analysis. So we'll be sharing that more broadly. There'll be more discussion around that. But yeah, end of the day, we look at this and we actually see ratepayer bills falling as a result of this, not rising.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, and not to throw our good friends at SCC under the bus whatsoever. They're doing incredible work over there. And if you guys haven't caught the news about the huge multi-$100 million investments Virginia is going to be making in its grid, thanks to the plans, phase 2 of the plans approved by SCC, that's some of the biggest news that's out there. And I encourage you to Google for that, because that's a big game changer right there, and will dramatically improve the cost curve and reliability of our grid.
And Dan, I'll just tie that back. We talked about the changing face of energy policy in Virginia. That settlement flows out of the Grid Transformation and Security Act, where the utilities talked about how we go about modernizing that. We are going to move in the next several years as a result of that settlement towards a much more sophisticated distribution grid that I think will be better able to handle a host of distributed resources, as well as transportation electrification more broadly. So, we are encouraged by that result. We want to make certain that that investment, that ratepayers see the full value out of that investment. And I think that comes with optimizing the use of distributed resources, behind the meter resources throughout the grid. Something that the Clean Economy Act certainly did by raising the DG cap, increasing the ability for PPAs, raising the threshold for the start of standby charges, sort of a host of other measures like that. So that too was part of the policy process. And I think we're going to see more of that flow out of that work, provided that we maintain the policy landscape we have now. And that's been our biggest ask of lawmakers. But happy to talk about some of the specific bills where, we see things rolling back and we need to play defense.
Yeah, I think maybe one of those areas you can go there, maybe somewhere else is, and there's plenty of choices to make, right? For example, the Virginia City Hybrid Energy Center, which is a Dominion plant. I think it does run at a loss. And, do we extend the life of it or not? There's some numbers out there that to extend the life to 2029 might cost ratepayers $472 million. So those are some of the battles. How do you see that one and some of these other, very specific items playing out on the Virginia's energy landscape?
Yeah. There's been a lot of conversation around the Virginia City's Hybrid Energy Center. We'll see that sort of continue to play out here, I think, during this session and in future sessions. A lot of efforts to try and ensure that that isn't retired by force of law. The economics you just cited, Dan, are the things that are probably going to move it offline faster almost than anybody else is able to do that, which is if you look at the utilization rate of that facility year over year, it's dropping. There are still fundamental costs that need to be paid. So every year it also becomes a bigger burden on ratepayers without doing a lot to necessarily increase our reliability. I understand and I sympathize with lawmakers in Southwest Virginia for whom the community and the larger region is really reliant upon the economics of that plant and others like them. I think, and this is something that a lot of other speakers on this show and elsewhere are much more sophisticated and can get into even better than I, there needs to be a broader conversation about how you make that transition, because whether we do it intentionally through law or it just happens by default economics, the nature of the economics in Southwest Virginia are changing. I think, and Majority Leader Kilgore has a bill that in part tackles these things. There is an awareness of that need to make that transition. And I think industry is poised and ready to help in that process. But you have this infrastructure that is increasingly non-economic, that if it moves offline, I think it improves the sort of fundamental economics of the grid. And it also creates space for more of these clean and cost-effective resources on it as well. I think the final thing I'd note, and this goes back to your point in regards to VCHEC, is, it is a little difficult sometimes to listen to folks talk about the need to improve ratepayer savings, and yet some of the legislation that is out there is focused on the preservation of non-economic resources. Understand the motives for both, but you can't have your cake and eat it too.
It's a turbulent time and very confusing, and there's a lot of crosswinds, and I get it. This isn't unique to Virginia. We're all wrestling with this incredible renaissance, and this is what happens. Such as a revolution, visibility is very poor, and I hear that from everyone, not just in our specific space here, thinking about energy, but just everywhere. No one knows where we're going. I think nuclear is going to sneak up on a lot of people, especially going back to this specific coal plant. 2029, the next generation of nuclear, modular, smaller, safer, passive technology reactors, I think, are going to come out of nowhere mid-decade. Super optimistic about that. But let me. Oh, go ahead.
Well, and Dan, I do want to note one thing really quickly, that we, the folks who put together the Clean Economy Act and the lawmakers obviously developed it, passed it, envisioned that sort of future, and envisioned that we don't know entirely what that future looks like. And so what it says is not only does all of our existing nuclear, can that be counted towards grid decarbonization so we don't double decarbonize our grid, but from 2030 onwards, if there are new zero carbon resources that can come online, they can count towards that sort of clean, not renewable, but clean share of the grid as well. And they can be part of that solution too. So the VCA allows for essentially the known unknown, and maybe it's small modular nuclear, maybe it's really cost-effective CCS. To be frank, having seen the technology and having seen the dynamics around it, I'm a little skeptical of that, but anything's possible. Maybe it's cold fusion. I don't know. But we allow for that in that policy framework. So I think there are a lot more opportunities. And that I suspect will actually only help drive down costs further. Yeah,
one of the known unknowns that is probably a positive for us, the innovation curve, the nerd army, I like to say. It's bigger than ever. There's more of us than ever, and we're all out there working 24 hours around the clock. Maybe cold fusion, maybe hot fusion, Harry. Following that news, more and more these compact fusion reactors, many suns burning hotter than the sun. Who knows? I have the great thing is it's all coming online. It's just a question of timeline. And but we have these solutions scaling now. And before, I do want to open it up for questions. I'll pull up the chat here in a second, so keep dropping those. But I want to loop back kind of to where we started, and we thinking forward. But taking real stock of where the Commonwealth is and the incredible success early in the Renaissance, because over the last decade, Virginia's really run away with it. Lots of new economy type stuff, lots of the right kinds of smart investment, bipartisan data centers. The economic development case for Virginia has been overwhelming, and that momentum has been building. You mentioned earlier, the #1 state for solar, a lot of corporate solar going in, a lot of corporate buyers, the invisible hand of the market. Making it happen, but back-to-back #1 state to do business in the CNBC Business Survey. So that's where we are right now, and there's a lot of growth in the pipeline, as we've been alluding to. So
the two things are connected. I would just note the two things are connected too, and I'll note one really specific and obviously very high-profile economic development over the past couple of years was Virginia securing Amazon's HQ2. Obviously, we only sort of got part of it, and then New York backed out on the deal. So I think realistically, Virginia has seen the vast majority of it. It flew largely under the radar, but there's a specific stipulation in that agreement that Amazon be able to pursue and have policies in place to enable them to meet their clean energy goals and do that in a really cost-effective manner. And I think that is as well why one of the subsidiary reasons why Virginia has been, and I hope continues to be, a hub for data center expansion and development. It is the ability for those large buyers to meet their decarbonization goals at the same time. And so there's this real risk that if we were to turn back on that, not only would you drive out the immediate advanced energy industry from the state, but you would also drive out a host of other large corporate purchasers who care deeply about what that grid profile looks like and the trajectory that we're on.
Also at the last Virginia Solar Summit, we had the county administrator, Pulaski County, Mr. Jonathan Sweet, and getting into the economic development case. And really, it's a competitive advantage. A lot of folks might not understand how site selection works. New factory going out, being located. It's a check the box kind of review. And if you can't check that green energy box, they will pass over that community and go to one until their entire checklist is filled. So Virginia, we've seen a lot of EU investment, a lot of foreign investment coming. There's just sua sponte corporate goals, like Google wants to be able to power itself 24/7, 365 now with renewable energy. So lots of reasons why people have these demand for these renewables, but they do now. It's not going to unwind, maybe irregardless of state and federal policy. Some of this, we've just crossed the Rubicon. There's no going back. And so early adopting communities they have an edge, and it's going to make an impact on the bottom line, the economic growth. And that's what America's all about. Yeah.
Wholly agree.
Right. Yeah. Harry's nodding his head. Yes, sir. So, okay, let me, Harry, any thoughts about on the economic development case? I want to kind of square you up on that before I turn to the audience questions, because I think a lot of folks in the incoming Youngkin administration are having this conversation. I'm having this conversation with a lot of folks about growth over this next 4-year period, keeping Virginia in the wind, so to speak, and perhaps not quite for our audience, but quite literally for all of our cousins over in the wind space. But how do you see maybe Democrats, Republicans, cats and dogs, and the Youngkin administration coming together to keep the growth gravy train going?
Well, I mean, the great thing about the policies that we already have in place is if we simply allow those policies to continue to function. I mean, the VCA isn't a 1-year or 2-year policy. It's a 30-year policy that puts us on that a really consistent trajectory. Stay the course on that, and we'll see those rewards. We talked about solar growth, development of both rooftop and utility scale, but to your point about, friends over in the wind sector, we saw the first offshore wind blade factory in the United States being established in the Port of Virginia. Announcement about that in October, and that has everything to do with Virginia taking an early lead in large utility scale offshore wind development. Virginia is supremely well situated to be the hub for offshore wind manufacturing in the United States. If we stay the course on these things, I think, the job creation that results from that and the economic opportunity, and then the larger supply chain that stems from that, is really significant. But if a bunch of these companies go, I don't know whether that's going to still be in place in a year or two, I would imagine that they take their business elsewhere. And that is our concern. So, I mean, I think for everyone who's coming into the policymaking landscape, our number one message is stay the course on the Clean Economy Act, stay the course on the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, stay the course on clean cars.
Thanks, Harry. Perfect. I couldn't agree more. And I think, this is the race of the 21st century as well. The Chinese, I think people would be shocked how quickly they've shuttered all their plans for expanded coal and some of these other things. It's the next economic race, so to speak. So before we turn to audience questions again, make sure you check out our website. You can get tickets to the live in-person Virginia Solar Summit at the beautiful Altria Theater in downtown Richmond, Virginia, April 26th, 27th, and 28th. We've got a supersized venue with lots of extra space. We will not sell this venue out to capacity. We're very much looking forward to a beautiful springtime with all of our co-hosts there. And all of our sponsors, terrific speakers, but we're getting back to the advanced networking. So the round robin is returning the Solar Exchange. Landowners can attend this event free. Bring your site, so to speak, sit with solar developers, and we'll feed you and educate you over the course of the 3 days. And if you know any landowners, there's no trick to that deal. They get to come and just sit down and meet a bunch of solar developers all at once. So they're getting phone calls and pamphlets anyway. Come meet everybody on their terms and bring your notebooks. Okay, so next week we've got some great speakers lined up. The superstars at Sun Tribe Development. We're going to be picking up kind of right where Harry and I left off on benefits. Betsy Arlen and Austin DeButts, and then on Thursday we're going to pick up on the workforce piece with Mr. David Peterson, the executive director of Shine. All right, so with the time that we have remaining, I want to thank again our live audience, especially those sticking around. If you have any questions, now is the time, drop them in the chat. Let me get to the one that I see from Sam Resson. And Harry, you might have already read it, but for folks listening later, do you anticipate seeing some pushback to withdrawing from the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative from Republicans, especially in coastal areas whose districts could benefit from the funds for flood planning and resilience project? Harry, you mentioned that funding earlier.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. We did see a number of races, a number of seats flip in the Hampton Roads and, Virginia Beach areas. So you've got a number of incoming Republicans whose policy positions on some of this stuff, I think, have yet to be defined. Is there a substantive policy position, or is it going to be more of a partisan issue? I think the governor's announcement around RGGI has injected a certain amount of political partisanship around that. So I don't know if you then see individual Republicans who sort of buck the trend on that. I do know there are Republicans in that area who have been pretty skeptical of RGGI, despite the benefit that it sort of provides to that area. So I wouldn't hazard a guess as to where they come out. But if I were an incoming lawmaker who had in that area where you saw recurrent flooding and there was a revenue source to address that, to provide for coastal resilience, to address these sort of issues, and I had won by a couple hundred votes, I would be extremely sensitive to that issue. So only time will tell on that, but it's certainly something I think they need to be mindful of.
Can I follow up quickly, with a man with his finger on the pulse, Harry? Do you see the clean energy issues really becoming local now, more so than ever? Like, people really understand these things. And I'll give one quick setup, something I've never seen before that I was told about a deal in Virginia, a community solar development at the very late stages, insisting on a provision that thou shalt not source your materials from a region that is abusing its labor. It's about the Uyghurs in China. I've never really seen a community be that thoughtful, and at such a late stage really have the legal bandwidth to try to put something into a PSA like that. Are you seeing, either whether at the community leadership level or just individual citizens, is clean energy really coming home in people's minds?
Obviously it varies from community to community. I do think that it has become more of a localized issue, and we didn't really get the opportunity to delve into this, but we see it manifest in the legislature this session, and we've sort of seen it percolate. And anybody who's been in the solar development space, I think, has experienced this over the past several years. The dynamic around solar siting and engagement with localities and landowners and neighbors around this. I mean, I think that has become more acute. A little bit of extremely wonky Virginia legal policy. Virginia is a Dillon rule state. So any powers not specifically granted to the localities remain with Richmond, with the central government. We have a permit by rule process that facilitates a lot of this development. And we see a couple of pieces of legislation that are trying to go after that process. I'd flag in particular HB 202 and 206 as pieces of legislation in this session that are of acute concern to the industry. But I think that's the manifestation of the local siting issue in Richmond, but also playing out at the local level as well. So to answer your question, yes, I think I'm answering your question in a slightly different way. There are the climate concerns that folks see in particular areas, but there's also the siting issue and the development issue that is very much playing out in local politics and in local communities.
Awesome, thanks. So yeah, quick question I want to just handle. Does someone know where to get information about community solar compensation in Virginia? I'm not exactly sure what you mean by compensation, but check out Dominion's website, dominionenergy.com, or Virginia Energy.
I would note as well the communities, the CCSA, the communities. God, why am I blanking on this? They are a fellow trade association. I'm just blanking on the second C, but it's the Community Solar Association. They focus on what shared and community solar really looks like in this space. Virginia is just starting down the path of true community solar. There's actually some good legislation this year that would expand that into APCO service territory. So more coming on that, but there are a number of companies that are starting to engage in that. It's an exciting opportunity. We're really just in the pilot phases, and there's a lot of regulatory churn still to play out.
Thanks, sir. Yeah, and I think maybe the most helpful I can be for folks is that community solar in Virginia the terms to Google are shared solar. So try shared solar Virginia, Dominion Energy. You can search Dominion's website for those terms, but it's shared solar in Virginia, and that should open you up to the whole world of community solar in Virginia. Harry, last question. Tactical as you want to be, getting back to the Wheeler nomination, which has got people fired up, but thinking very practically, one of the things I think, being a student of EPA, working closely with EPA at all levels, there was a bifurcation, I would say, in the Wheeler administration of EPA between kind of the air and a lot of climate related policy, and then going maybe leaning in double hard on places like Superfund, brownfield redevelopment, and some other places, things typically with economic development pieces where there's growth or some other things, some bipartisan agreements, particularly on brownfields, which is one of the last remnants of bipartisanship. Everybody understands the public sector role to play with respect to legacy pollution, but does Wheeler sneak through, in your opinion? And either way, will Youngkin take kind of a bifurcated, ruthlessly bipolar kind of approach like that, or you think he'll be more pragmatic and lean towards economic growth if he gets to decide between the two?
On that latter question of what does the governor choose to do, what path is he taking, I think it's too early to tell. It would appear that he has a close working relationship with Andrew Wheeler. When he signed the executive order around RGGI, he actually thanked Wheeler in advance. So clearly, like, there is an intellectual connection there, and Wheeler has a lot of advice. So, I mean, past may be predictive of future. I'll let that sort of play out as we see fit. The vast majority of Senate Democrats have indicated that they would oppose Wheeler. It is difficult to see in that scenario someone being able to walk away from that and be the deciding vote. Is that possible? Yes. Does it seem likely? I think no, but we shall see. That's not us taking a position on the issue. That's just reading the political tea leaves.
Thanks, Harry. Yeah, I think Mr. Wheeler has become a lightning rod, unfortunately, but very, very endemic of our politics these days. It's lightning rod after lightning rod, from administration to administration, from Trump to Obama. I think everybody's hated the president as long as I can remember. And in Virginia, hopefully, I hope we're turning towards more progressive things. So, Harry, I'll give you the last word, top of the hour. I know you're going to go. Are we going to make it? The brighter future, the Renaissance? Are we going to get there, man? Bipartisanship?
I hope so. We've got the policies in place. We just got to stay the course.
In spite of ourselves, you're an optimist. Awesome.
I'm an optimist because of the economic trajectory of this, but I am a realist that there is real risk, and the industry needs to engage and deliver the message to lawmakers now that we have to stay the course. Policy matters.
Yeah, TikTok, I think the shot clock maybe reset with fracking, the last little carbon boom, but I think the shot clock is ticking back down again. Well, thank you, Harry. Appreciate your time. Get back to work. Thanks everyone for your questions and for tuning in, and check out our website, virginiasolarsummit.com. We hope to see you in person for more great substance, networking, and more. The future is as bright as we build it. Keep up the good work, everyone. Thanks again, Harry.
Thank you, Dan.